Good afternoon. John Deasy just said to me, if 2 years ago someone would have told me there would be standing room only for a conversation on the Common Core, I never would have believed it. Thank you for caring so much about education. I'm Lynda Resnick. I'm a trustee of the Aspen Institute, and I'll be moderating today, and I'm thrilled to be here. We have an all-star panel with us to wrestle with the issues of college readiness in America and to debate a new approach to teach critical thinking in our schools. As a parent and a grandparent, I'm passionate about this issue, and I'm also invested as a business owner and a philanthropist who puts a lot of energy and resources into improving public education in the California Central Valley, the agricultural capital of America. This is no small matter. Our global economic leadership is at stake. Harvard University compares international test scores of students in 56 countries. They found that America ranks 25th in math, 17th in science, and 14th in reading. Now, we know that testing is only one measure of success, but consider this, if you will. 75% of America's youth do not qualify to join the armed forces due to a lack of a high school diploma, obesity, or a criminal record. We have the best higher education system in the world, and we are the leaders in research and post-secondary teaching. And we've reduced our high school dropout level to the lowest since 1974. But a diploma alone doesn't make a student college ready. Half of our community college students and up to a quarter of our four-year college students need remedial courses when they enroll in school. But they don't get credit, but they spend the time and money on these classes. And what happens as a result, many of them drop out. A mere 30% of college students earn an associate degree in 3 years. That means they go to a community college and only 30% get that degree. Education Secretary Arne Duncan said this week to a journalist, it's time to stop selling soothing lies to our children about their readiness. He said states have dumbed down academic standards to meet requirements of No Child Left Behind. Today's panel is about an exciting solution to our education needs. We're going to talk about college readiness and what's known as the Common Core. How many of you in this room really understand what the Common Core is? Well, good for you. And if you don't, there's a handout with a child's hand, or it may be turned over on the other side, on your table that is designed by the Aspen Institute. It's a primer that explains the Common Core in an easy-to-digest way for parents and other stakeholders. The Common Core is basically a seismic shift in how math and reading is taught in K through 12. These are high-quality academic benchmarks that set clear expectations for students and teachers in every grade level. The goal of the Common Core isn't to just help students get into college, it's to help them finish and succeed in a global economy. 45 states have adopted the Common Core standards, but implementation has been trickier. Will Rogers once said, even if you're on the right track, if you're sitting there, you might get run over. So today we have three distinguished panelists to discuss how we can keep moving. Let me introduce them to you. Eric Cantor, the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, serves the 7th District in Congress. The Majority Leader is a key player in his party's efforts to reform federal education policy and a strong supporter of school choice and voucher programs. Joel Klein is a reformer from 2002 to 2010. He was Chancellor of New York City Department of Education, where he oversaw the nation's largest school system of 1.1 million students. Joel's agenda raised graduation rates by more than 40%, and today he's the Executive Vice President of News Corp and CEO of Amplify. Joel is also the author of the Wall Street Journal article that is also at everyone's table about the politics of the Common Core. And John Deasy, from my hometown, is the superintendent of Los Angeles Unified School District, or what we call in LA, LAUSD. It's the nation's second largest school district, and John previously led education initiatives for the Gates Foundation, and he was superintendent of Prince George's County, Maryland. Today, John oversees 40,000 teachers and more than 600,000 LAUSD students, and he's been an early leader and a virtual pioneer in the Common Core. So we'll get started. Thank you. So, Joel, if I may start with you. You call the Common Core one of the most promising education initiatives of the past half century. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is the Common Core, and how is it different from what students are being taught today?
Well, starting with the basics is what we should start with, because in some respects, Common Core is returning to the basics, only the basics as the 21st century will apply them. First of all, Lynda, let me thank you really for inviting me to participate, the Aspen Institute, and for your commitment and devotion to public education. This is not our first discussion about those issues, and I'm thrilled to join my co-panelists and to participate today. I think the learning track of the Ideas Festival is second to none when it comes to really getting a saturated experience over a few days in education. So I just want to thank Walter Isaacson and the entire team here at Aspen for what they're doing. What Common Core is, Lynda started by saying the statistics, which have now become, in some respects, while frightening, there's some respects that we glaze over them. But the basic truth is not just that a quarter of our kids are not graduating high school, but of the kids who are graduating high school, many of them, if you listen to the College Board and ACT, almost 3/4 of them are not fully prepared for college. So we're kidding ourselves. When Arnie Duncan says we're lying to our kids, you give a kid a diploma, but no employer is fooled by the fact. Those junior colleges that are doing remediation for these kids are not fooled by the fact. And one of the big problems, education has many components, but one of the big problems is, what is it we expect an educated youngster in America to know in the 21st century? And we have a heritage that's very different from virtually every other country in the world. We've let 50 states do their own thing. A few of them, quite frankly, have done an excellent job in making sure they demand a lot of our kids. Most of them have dumbed down the standards. Why have they dumbed down the standards? Because they'd rather have a higher graduation rate. If you're running for re-election, it's better to have an 80% graduation rate than a 60% graduation rate, even if people don't understand that 80% is a mythical number. It's a sheet of paper that isn't worth the paper it's printed on. And so it's interesting the way this happened. The governors was an effort first started by the first President Bush, pushed really aggressively by Bill Clinton, and then finally coalesced in the late part of the 2010 decade, where they came together and they said, we're going to actually articulate, since education is a state thing, we're going to articulate standards that are both common across the country and core, meaning what it means to be an educated American. Let's not kid ourselves. Kids in Indiana don't compete with kids in Virginia for jobs. They compete with kids globally, and we have got to prepare our workforce for a global challenge. So these things do two things. They were all voluntarily signed up for by 45 states. Eric's state, Texas, Alaska, and Nebraska didn't join in, a couple others maybe, but they were voluntarily signed up for. And so for the first time, we now will know what it means on standards to say what a kid who's educated in one state is compared to another. But from my point of view, more important than the commonality is the coreness of it. And what it does is move our educational standards from stuff that I thought when I was running the schools in New York were far too fluffy, far too loosey-goosey, and not demanding. And as a result, lots of kids got diplomas, but lots of kids weren't ready for the 21st century. We'll get into the details, but remember, we're competing in a global economy with countries that set rigorous, demanding academic standards. If our kids are going to succeed in that world, we need to, as a nation, come together and coalesce on what it means to be an educated American in the 21st century. Common Core is not perfect, but it's a hell of an important first step in the right direction.
John, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, two things to add to that. One is that layout about making sure that youth are entering college and career prepared, being able to enter college without remediation, being able to enter the workforce, earn at least a living wage, benefits, and have a roof over your head, is eluding so many of our youth. So the other part of the Common Core that I want to add to is that this is a huge issue around equity and access. So for far too long, students got orange juice and other kids got orange drink. And the notion that rigorous coursework for every single student is a fundamental right of students can't be overlooked when we're having this conversation around the Common Core as well. I mean, we happen to have and run systems that are very, very large, larger than many, many states. Even within the systems previously, students were taking a variety of what was algebra. And it just wasn't the same, even across schools, let alone across states. That is absolutely tantamount to telling some students that you simply won't have and others will have. So the issue of equity and access is an enormous part of this as well.
Can you tell us what a specific class would look like today? For instance, how math is different today with the Common Core than it has been with rote learning.
So English language arts and mathematics are the two major curricula, K-12 in the Common Core that we are beginning to roll out. I think for the longest time, if you went to any kind of English language arts class, it was heavily colored by the notion that students were reading fictional text, and they were reading lots and lots of them. And so the shift that you would see almost instantaneously is a much greater focus on fewer, much deeper nonfiction text, so that students are being successful at a close read of the text and able to sufficiently answer challenging, ill-defined tasks that show that they can apply that. Good example, a 3-day lesson, for example, on the Gettysburg Address. You obviously intertwine issues of history in there, language, science, mathematics. We've been watching these lessons put out. So one of the things that teachers will experience is fewer, deeper standards with a much, much greater treatment around that, so that students are actually practicing, particularly in the notion of nonfiction text. Now, we also have fiction there as well, but it's not solely around that. In mathematics, it's progressions. So algebra unto itself has always been heretofore a course. Algebraic thinking is found literally 1 through 12 in the progression of mathematics. So much fewer standards, much greater, deeper treatment. Students having a much greater understanding of number sense and their ability to apply those.
Let me add one point quickly here on this, Lynda. I'm sorry to hog the thing there.
Yeah, because we have to hear from Eric.
Because I want to give one example which really lights me up. When I was running the school system, and I'm sure John had the same experience, you walk into lots of classrooms, and what you realize is complicated texts like the Gettysburg Address, short but enormously rich and complex, were basically being ignored. Best example I ever saw of this was a major textbook by a very major textbook company, in which they'd say, Lincoln read the Gettysburg Address, he talked about a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and the sole question they asked was, have you or anyone in your family had a recent encounter with the government of the people, by the people, for the people? And I said I got to sit next to Eric Cantor, so that may mean that's a good an encounter. No, but what we have, and this is a fundamental shift in why it's going to be hard. Too much of what's going on in K-12 today is what I call student-focused learning. What do you think about? What do you feel about? What do you care about? And what gets lost in that is reading complex, challenging texts, and equally important, acquiring knowledge. If anybody thinks that the internet is a substitute for teaching kids history or teaching kids complicated texts, they're making a big, big mistake.
Thank you. So, Leader Cantor, or as I call you, Eric, Virginia was one of the 5 states that opted out of the Common Core, and the school board there said that it would disrupt accountability and teacher preparation. So can you tell me how you feel about that decision and what your state is doing to bring kids up to the standards that they need to compete?
Sure. Just if I could start, thank you again. Always,
thank you,
I
Eric.
know being with you and Stuart is going to be interesting today. So I look forward to this discussion. In general, secondary education, I believe all of us embrace as the building block for any child's future. And these tremendous players and warriors on the part of our kids has spent a lot of time trying to figure out how it is that we can straighten out this tangled mass coming out of Washington, but that's only a small percentage. It is at the state level, mostly, is where the activity is in education. And so our state in Virginia, what we did back probably almost now 20 years ago is there was a suggestion, a mandate from Washington that we go about trying to formulate accountability tests, right? We don't want to just teach our kids or test our kids upon graduation. We want to make sure the progress is there every single year. We went through a very arduous process in Virginia. It's called, now we have something called Standards of Learning. From my limited knowledge of what other states are doing, I'm told that even back then in the 90s, Virginia was just one of a handful of states that actually took the mandate from Washington seriously, that we were going to put a lot of effort into developing these standards. And at this point, feel very strong, very invested in those standards that we have. I know, and I don't know whether this is as impactful to the experts as it would be to me in education, but I know that Education Week magazine has rated our school system 4th best in the country. When the legislature there, again, not being a member of the legislature there at this point, but when they decided not to adopt Common Core, they did so because they felt that our standards were actually meeting the needs of our kids and could be counted upon to do that without going to Common Core. Now, I want to say this. I absolutely embrace Common Core in terms of setting standards, keeping with the accountability measures that this country needs and our kids need. I especially think the key to Common Core is the voluntary nature in the way that these standards were developed. The National Governors Association, together with the likes of John and Joe and others, and I know, Joel, you're now in the private sector, but the expertise of people in your position were brought to bear to develop these standards. And as we've just heard, very fact-based information kids need, so that once they have that critical thinking mechanism can kick in and they can actually begin to articulate what it is they're thinking and saying, not just their beliefs and emotions and feelings. So I am wholly embrace that. Where I believe things went awry is when Washington began to barge in and have a foothold in all this and began to change these voluntary core standards and make them mandatory. And as you know, the Race to the Top program that was part of this administration's push carried with it a mandate that the states must then follow the Common Core. Similarly, waivers that have been granted by the Department of Education in Washington to states who want to get out from under the unworkable provisions of No Child Left Behind have had to then say, yes, we will now lock ourselves in to these standards. The issue to me being, if states then want to get out, they can't unilaterally do so. And so you are losing the ability at the state level, and for those states who frankly have done a good job, you're now telling them, forget it, you need to go ahead and listen to what we say. And I think, again, that's a long history of tension in our country between the powers of Washington versus those in the state capitals.
Does anyone have a retort for this?
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, I am glad you embrace, and I know you always have, the rigor, the demand. I mean, your position seems to me to be a principled position, if it's a position I disagree with, and quite frankly, a lot of people in the Republican Party disagree with, but it's not premised on what I've always been afraid of, which is, in politics, if people appear to succeed, it's good for politicians. And too often our kids appear to succeed without having mastered the work that needs to be done, and nothing in what Eric has just said suggests to me that he doesn't want the kids to succeed by mastering and succeeding. And you're right that several states have had decent standards. Most states have had wretched standards, independent analyses year after year. The only thing I would differ with you slightly is I don't think the federal government ever made it mandatory. If it did, Virginia and Texas and Hawaii and Alaska rather, and Nebraska would not be a part of this. So, and they incentivize it.
Well, what they did is they basically prescribed under the guidelines of the grant programs under Race to the Top that you had to, as states, adopt a national standard of accountability, and described in particular how or what that should look like, and there really wasn't anything else to fill that void. And that's in de facto, if you will, so not de jure. You're right, but de facto, these states now, if they want that money and if they want waivers, are going to be bound to a system where they don't have the flexibility. And listen, I hear you about politicians wanting to claim credit and say, look at our standards and we can teach to the test and make it look all rosy. I would also say Washington's not immune from that disease either.
No, Washington, no. But
so-
Washington.
Debbie Dingle's here, she's shaking her head. Bipartisan agreement. So-
Right. Well, but look at what happened in Indiana when Mitch Daniel, he said, I'm not going to apply. I don't want the federal money because I don't like the incentives. Every state was free to apply. This federal money, nobody had to take it. Nobody did. New York wanted to apply because we wanted the money. But Mitch, who's a leader in education reform in America, he said, but with or without the money, I'm going to Common Core because I want to do what's right for my children. And I think we can have a large partisan debate about federalism, the role of the states, and all the other things, which are tricky political issues. But the bottom line is, as a country, our country's future is not dependent on whether Virginia or Massachusetts educates kids well while other states don't. Our country's future depends on us collectively coming together and saying that when you graduate from high school in America, this is what it means to be an educated young American prepared for college. Right now, people are astonished by this, but 1 out of 4 kids who goes to college, who takes the College Board or the ACT, 1 out of 4 kids is ready in 4 core subjects.
I'm going to
astonishing.
ask another question. The beauty is these Common Core principles and these standards, they already had 45 states adopting them. I mean, right? So why did the federal government want to get in to begin to taint the process? So now what has happened is not only do you have those of us who've decided out, but I think there's about 11 more who, through their legislatures now, are deciding whether to get out. It was doing pretty well on its own as a voluntary standard organization and method. And that's where I'm frustrated because all of a sudden the taint of Washington has come
John,
in.
do you have
Yeah,
something
so
to add?
I don't really, I think we're a different example in California. It's a sore subject. We do not have race at the top, did not get race at the top. No, doesn't look like we're going to get race at the top in the future. But we adopted Common Core. And we have done that. I'm part of a group of districts ourselves. It's a rather well-known fact. We are applying for a waiver unto ourselves. And we absolutely are moving forward. We're actually ahead of the state by 1.5 years in its adoption. I think there are 2 common misunderstandings. One is these are not federal standards, these are not national standards. And second of all is profoundly developed by teachers. If you go to teachers, they actually embrace the fact that we will be teaching fewer, deeper pieces of content with a longer period of time instead of racing through a curriculum or a textbook so that students can actually have and be able to demonstrate application that's necessary to be successful at entry into post-secondary without remediation. And they're completely aligned with what we call school to career in terms of that. I hope that actually we do a strong job at listening to the teachers in our states so that we don't get in the way of disregarding teacher voice for a political conversation so that students can have the access and equity that they have actually long deserved in this country. And it doesn't mean to dismiss a good, robust debate on federalism. If there was a heck of a lot more money attached to it, I think that would be a different issue. Since the money is so slim and not much there, I don't get the, I personally don't understand the dilemma over it.
So, Joel, you called the Common Core constitutional federalism at its best in a recent article. The Tea Party movement is calling the Common Core Obama Core. And they say it amounts to a federal takeover of education. We've already determined that these standards were written by educators, by teachers, by researchers, and so forth. But many Republican leaders, you say 11 states perhaps are backing out. Yeah, so how can we win this war on critical thinking, and are your arguments gaining any traction with the naysayers today?
So poor John tried to save us from this federalism debate, but
All right, let's go for it.
let me say, I would say, no, actually, I can be mercifully brief on this, because the following things are true. Usually in politics, people divide on partisan grounds.
Really,
So-
I've never noticed that.
So, you know, Eric immediately says he and Debbie agree with each other, and so this is one where you can't tell the shirts from the skins without a program here. You've got Jeb Bush, Mitch Daniel, Huckabee, Christie. These are all prominent Republican leaders who are all Common Core and supported. You've got people on the left who don't like it because they think it's either generating a national thrust, or they think that it moves away from some of the tenets of classical progressive education, where we move away from student focus to a knowledge skills-based curriculum. So I think the politics are where they are. The good news is the overwhelming number of states will do it, whether it ends up being 45 or 40. And second of all, we'll have a laboratory, because we'll see how Virginia does and we'll see how other states do in comparison. So I think John's point to move us toward a focus on really what does it mean to be an educated American, whether you're in Virginia or here in Colorado, and what do we expect our kids to know and learn? And I think that's the critical discussion, because, you know, what somebody said before, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And that's too much of what we've had in K-12 education.
Absolutely. So we just, the House Republicans, Eric, and the Senate Democrats each passed their own bill out of committee without a single bipartisan vote. What do you think it will take for Washington leaders to get together and work toward the common good of our children in school?
Well, if there's any issue, I think that is ripe for that type of coming together, I think it is education. I think Joel's right. Not only do the the heads of the individual states, the governors on our side of the aisle, as well as on your side of the aisle.
I've been identified.
True bipartisanship here.
Yeah, really.
But I think education is one of them, because again, going back to the true essence of the opportunity society that all of us think America is, you cannot expect a child to take advantage of that opportunity if he or she is not equipped with the knowledge or skills necessary for today's careers, workforce, etc.
So we should be hopeful.
I do. We are going to be taking up the Student Success Act in Congress this month.
Good.
We on July yet? Almost. And
Tomorrow.
we're going to be doing that. And the essence is, and you can hear a little bit of the nuanced difference. I said I embrace Common Core. I embrace it in its origin as a voluntary product where states, governors, superintendents got together and developed standards of accountability. And it is a volunteer and state-based program, and it will provide us with laboratories. And it was doing great with 45 states having signed up until the federal government and the administration's department decided to link grant monies and waivers to essentially the Common Core. And at that point, it becomes a much different animal. That's my point. So we all agree on what, I don't think all of us, you're right, because on both sides of on the ends there is disagreement. But I think most Americans agree. So, you know, I'm hopeful.
Good. John.
I am hopeful also. I think that if there was, and I'm not a politician, I'm not running for office, I could not do the work that you do. I actually have tremendous regard for that,
Hold on
for
to
that
your
process.
wallets, folks. When a man says I'm not a politician.
But I meant in Congress. But I think what strikes me though is, wouldn't this be alleviated if we could actually get reauthorization through? And then we would not need the waiver. And while I'm hopeful that that could take place, for those who might not get that lingo, the ability to reauthorize No Child Left Behind so that we would eliminate the necessity for the waiver would seem to be a way forward. Are you hopeful that that is in the future?
I am, because there's been so much waiver activity that it's almost making a farce out of the legislative process, because you have the administration essentially making law through regulatory action, and this law that is now expired stands idle. So the Congress, House and Senate, I think, are very interested in putting its imprint on secondary ed policy going forward. So yeah, I do, and I think there has been enough out there, not only in the accountability area, but certainly I know we'll talk a little bit about school choice, charter schools,
Absolutely.
and the rest. I think
Yes.
bipartisan interest there as well.
And I know that we've been talking about accountability, and I know, Lynda, states have been waiting for the assessments to come that are linked to the Common Core, and there's a great deal of anxiety about that's coming. So also, Joel did a very quick primer. There are two consortia of assessments, one called PARC, one called Smarter Balance, and states joined those. California, where I get the privilege of working, joined Smarter Balance, and we're still about a year and a half out from seeing those first assessments. But we have a lot to do on the ground to bring support, much needed support to teachers and students as we get ready for those new assessments. And that is both going to shift the landscape profoundly. I mean, use the word seismic shift. I don't think that's an understatement as we
Right.
move forward in the next 2 years.
Well, you helped write that.
That was.
So, John, as we said, the official Common Core testing will not take place until 2015. But many schools, including those at LAUSD, are training teachers now, but still using the old No Child Left Behind tests. However, New York has already redesigned Common Core tests in grades 3 through 8 to force a change in the classroom. How do we help students and teachers go through this schizophrenic transition period, which is really going to be painful?
So very recently, the Secretary released guidance so that we wouldn't be having a two-track system in the various states. So I think that that's a huge possible relief that's in the middle of these next 2 years. In LA, we've chosen to roll this out ahead of time. We are waiting for our state's assessment consortium to change. But very recently, Smarter Balance, which is the consortium for the assessments in California, released a full battery of the public release items. So we have taken those items and redesigned our interim benchmark assessments, the one that we give 3 times a year, to help students understand what it looks like to take a Common Core assessment. We're helping parents understand what it looks like to take a Common Core assessment. We're helping teachers understand that, and they've all been written by teachers. So we've been in the process of taking what we call Common Core Fellows, which are teachers who have written best in class and master lesson plans that they're sharing across the curriculum. We just happen to be in gigantic scale. So it's an enormous scale issue. So there is a great deal happening to do that, but I can't tell you enough that the shift that we will see, I think, more profound than the adoption and the implementation of the Common Core will be a profound shift in how teachers learn to get better at the work of teaching. So the professional development is headed for a sea change, and that actually is what we're watching first.
Great. So, Leader Cantor, you've been a leader in your party supporting charter schools and vouchers to help students get the school of their choice. And many parents agree that we shouldn't have to wait for adults to get their act together, that their children's future is being shaped at this moment. But actually, only 3.5% of students go to a charter school in America today. So how does the Common Core, how do you think the Common Core is the solution to getting these 21st century skills if only 3.5% of students can actually go to a charter school? And where are vouchers today?
There's a lot in that question.
I know.
All right. First of all,
We have such little
let me just
time.
back up a little first very quickly on Common Core. My state of Virginia decided it wasn't best for us, that we
Right.
had standards in place that felt we're doing the job. And as Joel said, that'll provide a laboratory, so we'll see. So I support states having the ability to choose another route, but holding them accountable.
Right.
And part of what the Student Success Act that will come through the Congress on the House side this month will be making sure that accountability standards are still the law. We
Right.
need to do that. So
So you will be tested on the Common Core in Virginia, even though you have not.
you'll be tested on outcomes as to where
Yes.
your kids are.
All right.
And how they place nationally. But yet, leaving up to Virginia and other states who choose their standards, giving them the flexibility to make the changes to meet the needs of the population. On the issue of charter schools and school choice, I happened to be here in Colorado about a couple months ago and visited a public charter school in Denver called Strive, and a phenomenal laboratory of success from a layman's eyes to see. The school was overwhelmingly minority and met with probably 10 or so parents, as well as some of the Denver public school system administrators and teachers and kids. And I sat here and listened to this little girl named Selena talk about why she liked Strive. And I asked her parents, how did you get here? And I later found out that 50% of the public school students in Denver, public school systems, do not attend the school that they are assigned to. In other words, there is a robust system of choice in place. Similarly, I was in New Orleans in the beginning of the year with talking about a laboratory. That was unfortunately the case after Katrina, that they had to rebuild so much. So
Exactly.
I know that there was recent news today about a case in New Jersey where there are so-called, I don't think they have a voucher law, but there's money now from the state going to a Jewish day school and a Christian day school and being challenged in court about the constitutionality. So I know Louisiana just had it's called a education, it's a voucher program, overturned, but then the state legislature moved to provide additional monies. And I can tell you though, and back to your point, those of us who support school choice do so, number one, because you meet these parents and you talk to them, and all they want is their child to have the opportunity that so many of us and our kids have, but yet they're unable. Right. School choice allows them an escape route. Now, the argument, counter, I imagine, is, well, what are you going to do to the whole system when you pull out the parents who actually are doing what they should to look after their parents? I think it's a valid debate. I just come down on the side of the parents. Not that we're going to dismiss the rest of the system, but I believe you can do both. I don't believe you ought to tell this mom, Essence Jackson, who I met in New Orleans, that her daughter, Milani, can't have the opportunity she wants because somehow government hadn't been able to get its act together. And that's why I think we've got to have a real discussion about accountability standards, about choice when parents know their kids are trapped, and then what to do with the system. And I believe it's about competition within public schools, not necessarily private schools. Let's start with the charter schools and see competition come to place, because a recent report on charter schools did indicate that there's some question about the extent, I know these gentlemen here know a lot more than I do, of improvement that charter schools actually demonstrate. But one thing stuck out to me, and that was the charter schools, the systems that identified charter schools that were failing and closed them actually had a lot better results than others who let them stay open.
Let me agree with the speaker on this. I think what he's saying here is very powerful and very important. We need to do two things at the same time. We need to insist on accountability measured against rigorous standards. But let's be candid with each other. In this room, every single one of us insisted on choice for our kids. None of us simply said, my kid can go to the neighborhood school. If it's no good, we'll hope it gets better in 5 years. Fact of the matter is, and John talked about equity before, the people who have the biggest challenges, the kids who grow up in the toughest environments with the least family supports, those kids are told it's one and done. And that is simply wrong and inequitable. And we all need to work together, whatever our politics are, to create choice and opportunity, even as we insist on accountability. The second thing, what you're finding, it may be 3.5% now, but you're starting to see the KIPP schools and the Aspire schools and the other schools that John's got in his district, they're starting to be able to move towards scale. When I took over as chancellor in New York City, we had 18 charter schools. This year, when we open up, we'll have almost 200. And I'll give you the most telling statistic. Virtually all the students in those schools are kids who come from low-income families, many of them African-American Latino kids who had no opportunity before this. This year, there were 18,000 slots in our charter schools in New York, and over 70,000 families applied for it. So these are people, it's not a question of if you give them the opportunities, they'll find their way to it. You come with me to Harlem right now, where half our schools are charter and half are public, and the parents are the most sophisticated consumers. Why? Because I don't care who you are, people want a better opportunity for their kids. It's critical to them.
Yeah. So I too want to speak in agreement with the speaker. I'm going to put voucher aside. I want to speak on charter. We're the largest charter authorizer in the United States. We have more youth in charter schools than any system in the United States. Very robust, and we have created that choice as a fundamental tenet of the transformation of Los Angeles. So when I began 3 years ago, we had about 86,000 youth in charter schools. There's about 114,000 now in charter schools, and they are very high performing because we have closed low performing traditional public schools and low performing charter schools, and have opened high performing charter providers at the same time. We have also provided that robust choice inside of our traditional schools. I agree completely with the notion that it is a right for parents to have high quality public choice inside of the system. To your point when you began the question, Lynda, the charter schools in Los Angeles will all take the same Common Core assessment as the state. So we will be able to see whether it is the conditions of instruction and the opportunities for choice, because it'll be the same accountability for all schools inside of Los Angeles and inside of California for that matter.
And as you know, we run 2 charter schools, our company does. We have a preschool in the Central Valley, and we have a middle and high school in the Central Valley. Right. And they have a longer school day and a longer school year and all the arts, and it's great. And they're all, Title I. It's, So, Joel, you are creating this new Amplify system, a new computer tablet that makes Common Core learning easier for students. And does this help teachers also, and does it help children learn independently? I know we'd all like to hear about what you're doing.
Sure, I think so, and I just came from a panel where they were talking about the whole education and technology, and then Walter and I are going to do a discussion after lunch on this. But let me just say, I think we're at the cusp of something very exciting, which is the chance to really bring technology into the school system to enhance teaching and change the way kids learn. And it's not just Common Core, but this is a way, working together with teachers. I must say, everything we've developed in partnership with teachers. We're now piloting these things. We were recently in a pilot in Fulton County, Georgia. We're about to roll out some 20,000 tablets in Guilford, which is Greensboro, North Carolina. And what we're finding is both the kids and the teachers are enormously excited. Teachers who are really at first uncomfortable with technology, but with the professional development and the support that they're getting now, find how exciting it is. Kids who find this, you talk about extending the day, extending the year. These kids, when we put Wi-Fi or when we put 4G in their tablet, they can work at home, they can work in networks, you can customize and individualize. So while John Deasy is working on fractions because he's way ahead of the class, I'm still doing addition because I'm a little slower. And this is a way you could customize the whole system. So I think we're on the cusp of something very exciting, and I give Julius Jankowski and Arnie Duncan a lot of credit because they came together to put together this lead commission. And I think, again, this is one of these areas where 5 years from now, when we see the way kids are learning, it'll be an entirely different and much more customized, personalized, and I think much more exciting experience.
I mean, we are doing this. This is a very, very enormous initiative. We've just launched that every youth and adult will have a tablet with the Common Core curriculum as digital material on top of that. So it's 900,000 coming out in Los Angeles. Joel said something I think is really worth teasing out. We are watching something which seems seemingly contradictory. So students are going to experience a Common Core of high standards in a very customized learning environment. And so this very individualized and customized learning against a common set of rigorous standards is what the classroom is going to be challenged with. And I actually believe that technology is going to be the lever to allow that to take place. I mean, the same rote learning piece is just not going to be possible, and it's not going to happen.
Fantastic. So before we turn it over to questions, because I'm sure you have a lot, I wanted to ask all the panelists, if they can, for a moment. You know, what we found in education in the Central Valley, and I hear about it everywhere actually, is that parents tend to trust the teachers and the principals and not ask the hard questions about their children's education. So I'd like you to share with the audience today why it is so important for parents to get involved in their school, to ask the hard questions, and also how it will move the Common Core forward if that's what we hope to do. So John, would you like to start?
Sure, critically important. Parents not only have the right to this knowledge, it's our obligation to provide this knowledge. Walter and all of the trustees, and Lynda, you in particular, have done a tremendous job at the Aspen Institute at actually helping create materials for us to use in our school districts. We have a parent center in every single school. We have 1,014 schools in Los Angeles, and an entire primer so that parents can understand what to demand. And understand what they should be intolerant of in all of the 109 languages that we speak in the amazing city of Los Angeles. The notion is to make sure that, I say this all the time, knowledge is the underground currency of the privilege. And when everyone owns the same knowledge, in a city like mine, where overwhelmingly everyone lives in circumstances of peril and poverty, then you begin to provide true equal access to students. So this is an enormous issue for parents to realize not only it is their right, but that we actually have to provide them access to do that. And I think the power of that is parent to parent.
So I would agree with John and add just a couple of quick thoughts. One, I remember a world when we always thought doctor knew best or teacher knew best. None of us now, I hope, think doctor knows best. And then we should be really prepared to, that doesn't mean doctors know nothing. It just means we should be prepared to be informed and questioning consumers. And I think that's true in education. But I think there's a larger point here, and we haven't had a chance to talk much about it. I think the future of this country depends on educating our kids to a very, very different level, particularly those kids who grow up in the most challenged environments. The 21st century is going to demand skills of people in the workplace that we didn't demand in the 20th century. When I started public school in New York City, think about it, in 1951, more than 60% of our workforce were college dropouts. High school dropouts, kids who didn't graduate high school. Today, that number is 6% and declining. There's not going to be an array of jobs for poorly educated kids. And what's going to happen is the middle class will get hollowed out, and increasingly we will become a polarized society between haves and have-nots. So I don't want you to just get involved in your kids' education. Get involved in all our kids' education. People in this room, really important.
No question about
Leader Cantor, do you have some final thoughts for us?
I think that I think as John had said, and Joel for sure, that parents are going to get involved if the school systems and the government does its job in alerting them that they actually can. And I think Governor Bush is famous for saying, if you want to excite parents positively or negatively, go out there and institute a report card system for schools. And the minute parents see that report card, for good or for bad, they will be in the principal's office. And so I think that there is a collaborative effort that needs to take place to encourage that kind of empowerment going forward.
Thank you. So I hope you're more hopeful about education than you were when you walked in here. And would you wait for a mic? And I can barely see. I'm going to try and stand up over here so I can see the people. I see someone in the back of the room that just raised their hand. Wait for the mic to come, please.
Hello. Hi, my name is Daniel Jost, and I am a teacher and a product of LAUSD schools. I'm going to try to make sense of, there was a lot of things I wanted to talk about as a teacher in the room, and I think it's important to keep in mind. I think we all need to do a better job of celebrating the success that the teachers are doing. I'm going in on my 10th year, and I've had a number of successful years, and the accountability that I face every day are sitting next to me, these students. They will tell me how I'm doing, and I can see that very clearly. But I think the things that are kind of lost is, you know, we always talk about this gloom and doom. Internationally, the U.S. is failing, but we are one of the few countries that educates all our youth. We have such a diverse population. Charter schools, my wife teaches at one. They have a place, but they are not perfect. They have flexibility that sometimes our public schools don't. They
Excuse
require.
me, sir, do you have a question?
My question was going to basically be, how do we bring teachers along in this Common Core process so that the success that does get achieved at these states that have adopted them, that we can learn from them and value that expertise so that other states may be inspired to not see it as a federal government mandate, but as something that truly is successful for students.
Thank you. So who would like to answer that?
I mean, I think your points are incredibly spot on, and that is the best work is going to come teacher to teacher. This is but one example. We in Los Angeles instituted 300 Common Core Fellows, which are teachers who are leaving the classroom and being supported to help other teachers build lesson plans, to be able to help other teachers see and monitor instruction inside the Common Core. This simply is not going to work if it is relegated from district office or state down to teacher. The brilliance of being able to help students is not going to come from the outside. It's not going to come from hired professional development. It's going to come from high quality instruction inside of our districts. And identifying those teachers and asking them to take a role in that is where I think this begins. And I think it's right. I think it is both in the charter space and in the traditional space as well.
Can we get a mic? Oh, thank you. Can we get a mic over here for Sherry Lansing? Yes, Sherry's the head of the Regents of California.
I'm Sherry Lansing. You sort of tapped on what I was going to ask, but what I was going to say is I agree with everything that you said, and thank you, Lynda, for this extraordinary panel. But to me, education depends, no matter how good the Common Core is, no matter how good the technology is, it depends on the teacher. And that's really the thing that, as good a teacher as you and your wife are, how do we recruit more teachers? Because I think that's the element that I'm curious as to all three of you, how we get that and how we increase the value and pay our teachers more, and how do we get better teachers and more teachers?
We could probably riff on this for an hour.
Go ahead.
Schools of education, let's start choosing from the highest quartile of applicants, and when they graduate, pay them extraordinarily more than they are being paid right now. I mean, I think that is kind of non-debatable. And then second of all is release them from ridiculous rules that basically say you have to work here or you don't work here based on the day you were hired. How about the quality and merit of the instruction that you're doing and the work that you're being shown to us are ways that honor the teaching profession that we currently are somehow struggling with in this country.
I wrote a piece on this in the Atlantic recently about this. If everybody looks at Finland and they say what works in Finland, it's a #1 rated. And what works in Finland is they recruit their teachers from the top 10% of their college graduates. These are people who are in a profession. They're not governed by trade union rules. They're governed by professional rules like attorneys and et cetera. And they deserve, they should become America's heroes. And what you need to do that, you need to address the economics, but you need to address all the micromanagement that he's talking about. And we need to make teaching the most coveted of professions. I actually think we can live with some of the economic issues if we think intelligently about how we reward people. I know so many young kids in the school system who are prepared to work in the school system but won't do it, not because of the salary, but because they find the conditions oppressive, the rules unbearable, and the lack of professionalism unacceptable.
Eric?
I want to say, but I'd rather ask a question on this one too, because so much of the information that we get about teachers, I couldn't agree more. What is priority? That's the bottom line. Teachers should be a priority. Now, what about those who aren't teaching, like the gentleman here in LAUSD? What about those who aren't doing the job? How do you move them out so you can get the good teachers in? And I think, John, I'm sure he doesn't want to ascribe that to what he said, but I have to believe there are contracts, there are agreements in place that really restrict the ability for these leaders to be able to make sure that good teachers are there. It's a two-part thing. One, we got to prioritize it, like Joel says. Two, we have to give the flexibility to the leadership in the states and the local school districts to make sure that the good teachers are rewarded and those that can't do it are moved out.
Yes, amen. Yes, over there. Can we get a mic to the handsome man in the yellow shirt?
Thank you. I'm Jim Calloway, trustee of the Institute. I really appreciate everything you've said on the panel, but I'd like to ask you this real basic question. Don't you think we ought to get rid of the agrarian timing that we put in our education system, where our kids only go to school about 30 weeks out of the year?
So Jim, what I think is so interesting is that it's already happening, and it's happening right under our feet. Students don't even consider the notion of a school day anymore. They are connected, they are online, they are learning, in some cases 24/7, in very different models in terms of collaboratively. So it's actually, they are coming to something that's arcane. They have already existed this. It is the school system's responsibility at this point to catch up to our students in terms of how they are accessing information and learning. And I think that, I'm a card-carrying union member, my whole family, so this is not about union issues, but the rules about minutes and hours and days actually disenfranchise youth, but particularly youth who live in circumstances of poverty. So I think what you will see is technology is becoming a very disruptive force around traditionally arcane structures.
It has been shown factually that kids who go to a 5-week summer session do better than the kids who don't go to a
Absolutely.
5-week summer session.
Or preschool.
Every great charter organization that's getting big success, KIPP, Aspire, Uncommon Schools, they have a much longer school day and a much longer school year. We're joking ourselves to think that we take the kids with the greatest challenges and we give them basically 4.5 to 5 hours of academic work a day, and that's going to succeed. And we do that, as you say, 30 weeks a year. We have got to change that. What John is saying is important. Technology can help us change that in a way that may make it more palatable and feasible given the realpolitik of the school systems.
All right, we only have 5 minutes left. Any more questions? Over here.
Teachers want to go home.
And then Jane, yeah.
I would just say I totally agree that education is the equalizer, but families are the stabilizer. And so many families, increasingly so, are destabilized by poverty. When we're talking about a skilled workforce, rigor is important, but as is grit and character. And what I'm concerned about is that if we don't have a commitment to socio-emotional wellness supports, hand in glove, we'll never achieve what we're seeking here. Because we talk about teaching the whole child, but most children are entering these buildings broken. And teachers can't do their job because they're playing social worker and therapist. And I see that on the front lines every day. So I'd be curious about what you've seen, Joel, and if you think there's any merit to this concern that I have.
Of course, there's merit to the concern. I'd say 2 quick things in response. One, we're wasting the earliest years in those kids' lives. We start them when they're 5 or 6 years, when we should be starting them much younger to get them not just the social supports and the psychological supports, but the educational supports early on. And second of all, while I am enormously concerned about the issues you raise, I have seen with my own eyes lots of kids who come from the most challenged environments get an education and turn their world around. So to me, as much as I think we need to do more to address the issues of poverty, and Pam Cantor is here and Turnaround for Children is doing tremendous work with our schools in New York and DC and elsewhere, As much as I think that's critical and important, I guess I'll never give up on the following thing, which I've said millions of times and I believe deeply, is when I became chancellor, people said, we'll never fix education until we fix poverty in America. I believe it's backward. We'll never fix poverty in America until we fix education in America. Even though we shouldn't give up on the things you're talking about. They're important.
I want to add one piece to this. You didn't ask this question, but I'm not going to miss this opportunity. One of the greatest things that this country could do for me is give me robust immigration reform.
Absolutely.
Many of my youth and their parents live in a shadowland and are unable to access the basic structures of support, even though they are weakened, and we need to strengthen that. That is one of the greatest problems I have at the moment in terms of the society, which I can't affect, but which we welcome at their door.
So one last question. Is it Jane Harmon is out there? She has a question? Hi, darling.
Hi everybody. Lynda, you not only run good dinners, but you run good panels.
Thank you.
So as a K through 12 graduate of LAUSD, my question is, how important is collaboration between school administrators and local politicians, school boards and mayors? I mean, it seems to me, just looking at Joel in particular, that your strong connection to Mike Bloomberg gave you a platform to cause major change.
Would you want to do positive first?
Yeah, no. I actually, this gives me the note I do want to end on, because I do think Mike deserves a lot of credit in terms of willing to take control of the schools and take on a lot of tough and heated questions. You know, change, everybody wants change, except when it means they got to change something they're doing or something that impacts their lives. And so, you know, it's very hard when you take on a complex embedded system. And I guess, Jane, what I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to say is, I think what John Deasy's doing in LA is as important as anything that's going on in K-12 right now in America. I really do. And there's a lot of people from LA here. But, and this is what I was saying before, he needs support. Politicians respond to the things that are in front of them and on their plates. And what people in LA need to know, all the politicians, the school board, and everybody else, is that John Deasy is going to be the leader of this school system. He's going to do the bold things. You know, the mayor used to sometimes say to me, well, you know, everything you do is so controversial. He said, well, you know, when I appointed you, I said, you would do some controversial things, but everything's controversial. And I said, Mike, the day I stop doing controversial things, you ought to get a new chancellor. And the day he stops doing controversial things, because the status quo has to change and change significantly, otherwise we'll continue to get the same results. So I just hope all those people here will get behind what he's doing and make sure that he continues to lead.
So John, do you have a final thought?
I actually think your point is spot on, and unabashedly thank you for the tremendous support you have given historically to the state of California, and particularly at LAUSD. Two thoughts. One is, do not be confused about your mission. We are not confused about our mission. We have 900,000 youth. The overwhelming majority live in circumstances of unimaginable peril and poverty, and every one of them wants to be you. Everyone has a right to be you. They have a right to graduate college and workforce ready. And things that get in that way are not tolerable. It is against their right. The system operates for one reason only: youth. We want to do it with lots of adults, but it only operates for youth. And we have no time to do this slowly. King warned us about the tranquilizing drug of gradualism some time ago. If we do not heed that warning now when it's needed most, then shame on us for doing that. I get the politics are crazy, and I get that it's very complicated. I do not think it gets that complicated when you are not confused about your mission.
So I want to thank the panelists. I think this was a great program, and thank you all for your attention. Thanks for coming.